Five Rings Podcast, your weekly amateur sports and Olympic sports show with Duane and Kevin. And now, without further ado, here's Duane Rollins.
And welcome to the Five Rings Podcast. I am Duane Rollins here in Toronto, Canada. Kevin Laramie joins me as always in Montreal. We had a bit of a week off last week because of scheduling issues, because of just life. Sometimes, Kevin, we need to take a week off here and there, but we are going to amp this up going into the summer season now. Expect this to be weekly again, along with our other two podcasts, The Two Saltitudes and USL Radio now, if you're a big fan of amateur, not amateur, but lower level professional soccer in North America. But at any rate, enough of that. Kevin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Spring still hasn't come to Montreal. It's the winter that will never end, just like those games that nobody wants. I don't know, I kind of can't get into summer season until it's kind of warm, and it seems like it's never going to come.
Yeah, I called it fake spring in another show the other day, and that's kind of what it is. It should be spring, and people want it to be spring, but it isn't spring yet. You have a home game outside in the soccer at Saputo Stadium soon too, don't you?
Yeah, there's one this Saturday at 2 USL, and yeah, it's gonna be cold. I think I'm gonna stay in by the fire this weekend. I don't have a fire. I live in an apartment, but anyway, we have a great. Don't light a fire.
No, I wouldn't do that. We have a great guest today, Sean Fitz-Gerald from the National Post, which is a major newspaper here in Canada, national newspaper in Canada. Sean is covering the Pan Am Games in the lead up to it. He's going out and he's actually playing the sports that are not necessarily familiar with them, in an effort to understand them, to appreciate the athleticism in them, and to sort of just have a fun little approach to previewing the Pan Ams. He came on the show. We interviewed that about a few minutes ago. And he talked about the Pan Am's legacy, about what success will mean here in Toronto, about his personal feelings on the games, about the potential of an Olympic bid in Toronto down the lines. A really good conversation that I think you're going to enjoy. We had him on here a few minutes ago, and we'll bring him on in a second. We're also going to talk about the Concacaf Champions League, which Kevin is very excited about because his club, the Montreal Impact, are in the final of the CCL. What we're gonna focus on today is just how weird the CCL is. It's got to be the weirdest of all the champion leagues. CONCACAF is a unique beast, and it certainly never fails to amuse at the Champions League level. Paris is having a vote. We'll talk a bit about that. We're going to talk a bit about women's hockey and what needs to happen to change that sport's fortunes right now. Another World Championship came and went. Same two teams in the finals as always. Same result usually too. The U.S. wins all the World Championships. Canada wins all the Olympics. That's how that plays out. So we'll talk a bit about that and about their need to maybe promote themselves a little bit better. We'll get into that a little later. And we're going to talk about ethics in sports watching. Do you have ethics as a fan? Do you not watch certain events because of politicalness, because of something that you disagree with? Is that even something you should be doing? The Masters start this weekend, in case you're not following where this is coming from. I'm not a big fan of the Masters, and we'll get into that later. But Kevin, that's a lot of rambling right now. Let's take a quick break. Bring Sean on from the National Post.
All the weight, all the time, all the worry is behind you now. Through the fire, all the pain, for the glory of the game.
And welcome back to the Five Rings Podcast. Duane Rollins here. Sean Fitz-Gerald from the National Post joins us. Sean, he's been doing a lot of lead-up stories for the Pan Am Games here in Toronto. He's been going out and actually trying the sports himself. Sean, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Let's start there. I heard you're going to do an odd sport today. Tell the listeners what you're doing today.
The great thing about the Pan American Games, and I know that, in Toronto, people hear great thing and Pan American Games in the same sentence and they roll their eyes. But when you get down to the competition and beyond how much this is costing everything, it actually is really interesting. There are 8 Pan Am specific sports. Those are sports that aren't on the Olympic roster. So you get things like water skiing and wakeboarding and bowling and karate. And there's another one, and I'm going to get to try that one this afternoon. It's artistic roller skating. So it's just like figure skating, same terminology, a lot of the same moves, except it is absolutely on roller skates, the kind that anybody around in the 70s, 80s, and 90s would remember spending their Fridays or Saturday nights doing at the local roller rink, and that's this afternoon.
Are you going to get a 70s garb up, or no? I digress. These are world-class athletes that you're talking about. I think that's probably the lesson that you're trying to put out there with this. Is that correct? Like, what have you learned from doing these type of activities?
Well, in terms of my garb, my 70s themed wig, for reasons I'm not at liberty to disclose, is still at the dry cleaner, so I won't be wearing that today. But the athletes, yeah, that's the point. I think it's really interesting for a sport. For sports that we don't have a lot of fluency in, and speaking for myself, I don't have a lot of fluency in. I think it's really interesting to sort of try and go there and see how it is performed at the top level. I think, for the big sports, for soccer, for example, for hockey, for football, for baseball, enough people have gone and watched it and realized that, yeah, you know what, this is really different than what I can do in my backyard, kicking around with my son or my friends, playing soccer or going and playing beer league hockey. But you don't really have that grounding when it comes to badminton because, everybody plays badminton at some point in the backyard at the cottage or wherever. But at the high level, it is very different. Like those birdies move at, up to 250 kilometers an hour at the highest end. So it's just sort of an effort to go out there and see firsthand. Like it sounds weird and it doesn't really come across all the time on TV. So what does it look like? What are some of the techniques and just how good are these athletes?
Do you think it's part of the charms of the Pan Am Games to have those type of event that are the highest level for those events? You spoke about the artistic figure skating on rollerblade. There's the inline speed skating as well. So there's a lot of event. Do you think it's part of the charms of a game like the Pan American to have sports that the public is not 100% aware of?
Absolutely. For karate athletes, for example, karate's been lobbying to get into the games for years, and they're trying desperately for 2020 when it's in Tokyo. But they said, this is our Olympic Games. They have their World Championships, they have very big international competitions, but when it comes to something where you have an athlete's village, where you have a multi-sport competition going on, where you're competing against the best in your part of the world, along with 10,000 other athletes. It's a big deal. And you find a lot of these athletes. Bowling, this is our Olympics. There are big events in bowling. There's money to be made in bowling, but everybody who is in these Pan Am only games has described it, that I've come across, as these are our Olympic Games. So, for what everybody says about what the Pan Ams will or won't mean to Toronto as a whole, that can't be, conflated with what the games mean to the athletes competing.
You mentioned what Toronto could mean for those Pan Am, or the other way around. What do you think the Pan Am should mean to Toronto, and how should the public of Toronto react to those games?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You look at the infrastructure, and that's what the Pan Am Games organizers will go until they're blue in the face, saying that the legacy of these games are going to be the facilities that are left behind. So you have things like, the pool in Scarborough on the U of T campus. You have the football stadium in Hamilton. You have the Velodrome in Milton, and there are others. And that's the legacy. So on one hand, you have, a new pool, you have new facilities. I've been to the new pool in Scarborough. It's a fantastic facility. And I think you can argue that, something like that was necessary because people need pools. People want to use it. So I think that is one, that yes, I will grant you that as a piece of infrastructure that was needed. You go to the Velodrome in Milton, though, a very expensive very specific facility, and you wonder, right now it's in the middle of a farmer's field in Milton, and yes, the community is growing, but will it grow into this, indoor cycling fanaticism sort of hotbed? I don't know. Can that city pay for it in the long term once the circus sort of pulls up stakes? I don't know. You go to the football stadium in Hamilton, and that one is the one that I will argue with people for a long, long time, that I don't know what purpose that serves other than just giving the Hamilton Tiger Cats a new football stadium in the long term. I don't think that the city of Hamilton got everything it could. I don't think it's going to get the benefit of getting a new stadium. And I just don't, because they put it in the exact same spot that Everwin Stadium was in, and that's a very challenged neighborhood. There were more plans to put it in a better part of the city where there might be hope that it becomes part of a broader redevelopment. So that's another thing. So infrastructure is hit and miss. What it means to Toronto, I still can't wrap my head around it. I just don't know if people in this city will care, even when it's here. I think it might be a fun diversion for people who notice it, but I think in the city, people will just go on about their normal summers. Now, in Oshawa, where there's boxing, or in St. Catharines, where there's rowing, or in the other sort of satellite communities where there's other events, Markham, I think it could be a big deal. I think it could be a rallying point for people this summer to say, hey, look, we're on a broader stage, and this is a really interesting event.
Similar question, but a slightly different angle is if we were having this conversation a year from now, what will have success look like? What will have happened for us to look back at those games and say they were a success, Sean?
I was in Guadalajara 4 years ago, and Guadalajara, it's a different set of goalposts, but that was in a really dark period of the drug wars. Not that there's ever a light period of drug wars, mind you, but for years, people in Mexico had been confronted with, anytime Mexico seemed to make international headlines, it was for the atrocities being committed by these cartels. And leading up to the Pan American Games, you heard a lot of the same things. There's so many other infrastructure needs. Why are we spending it on a new stadium? Why are we building the athletes' village on the edge of town, bordering up on a desert? But as the game started, and people started seeing that, people are talking about the region differently, that they're looking at it through a different lens, that, oh, by the way, these games are kind of fun to watch. You started seeing long lineups for tickets. You started seeing people filling up the stands. You started getting this sense of civic engagement. So it actually did, lighten the mood. And maybe that was the best case scenario for those games in Guadalajara, that, for 3 weeks, people were talking about different things and actually engaged in a civic level that maybe hadn't been there before. I think Toronto is going to be a tougher sell. What is success? You get TV angles that aren't full of, fields of empty seats, for one. I think that's going to be the most obvious one. Ticket sales. Are people going to these games? And two, after the games leave, what are the usage rates for these new facilities? Everwin Stadium is one thing, Tim Hortons Field, excuse me, but I'll be really curious to see, the pool, the velodrome, the track facilities, the ones up in Markham, to see, just how much these facilities are integrated into their communities, because I think that's going to be the real lasting benefit, if there is one, from these games.
I'll bring up the elephant in the room here. With 2024 increasingly looking like the people of Boston are going to force that bid out, do you think there's any will or any effort, anything under the surface somewhere to maybe put an Olympic bid forward again in this city using these games as a springboard?
Yeah, you know what? That's interesting. Brazil, Rio hosted the Pan American Games in 2007, and now they're going to be hosting the Olympics next year. Guadalajara, which is a wonderful, lovely city with great food, I might add. At the end of their games 4 years ago, said that this was when Mexico was viewed as one of the real emerging economies in the region. That they were going to start pushing for an Olympics. That's been a little bit quiet since. But Toronto, you raise the specter of 2008 when they lost to Beijing, and then you look at what has now emerged as the prohibitive costs of staging these games, and it's not just the capital investment, things like needing a new stadium, and it's also the security. It's also are these venues going to be put to good, lasting use in the long term? Everybody's seen the internet slideshows of abandoned facilities in Greece after the Athens Games. What practical case can you make for an Olympics in Toronto? I'm not sure that one can be made when you're talking about the billions required to be invested, when everybody in the city knows that infrastructure, highways, transit absolutely has to be the first, second, and third thing on the agenda right now.
Do you think the Olympic Games as a whole have become maybe too big for what it's supposed to be? Because when we're looking at the games like Beijing or Almaty, who might have the game eventually, and all those type of countries, well, countries that have big democracies and big freedom, in quotes, well, usually they're hard for them to organize those type of events. And do you think they're becoming too big for cities like Toronto?
Yeah, for exactly the reasons that people debate over building smaller things like stadiums, hockey rinks. On a very small level, the Belleville Bulls recently played their last game as an Ontario Hockey League franchise at home, and the core issue of that team's moving to Hamilton. The core issue is that arena, Yardman Arena, was basically outdated. When the Bulls joined the Ontario Hockey League in 1981, and City Council, for various reasons over the years, kept kicking the issue down the road. And at the core of it is, there are so many things that a municipality has to look at before it looks at a sports and entertainment facility. Hospital builds, police stations, fire, roads, all of these things, all of the things that people pay taxes for as a society. Before building something for a hockey rink. So they never built or renovated the hockey rink, and because the OHL business, good or bad, seems to be growing and franchise values are going up and the stakes are higher, Belleville left. So you look at that now, and you look at in a democracy where people have a say in these sorts of things, theoretically where they want their tax dollars spent. Do you want Toronto spending? Russia spent $51 billion for the Winter Games. Say they even spent half of that. Do you want that much money going into a circus that will be here for a month? Two when you consider the Paralympics, but that's it. Are you getting full value out of that cost in the long run? And I think it's really hard to justifiably say yes.
Sean, I want to move the conversation a little bit to an article you wrote on modern pentathlon, of all things, which is a sport that gets kind of teased up. I actually covered a modern pentathlon way back when I was working in Guelph, but I was impressed by the athletes, as I think you were as well. But talk about that story and how you wrote it and what it sort of taught you about funding and the nature of being an amateur athlete in this country.
Yeah, I mean, modern pentathlon, it was kind of an interesting one. Somebody reached out to me because I'd done a story about the Dufour-Lapointe sisters, sort of the mogul stars from Sochi, and how their sponsorship base when they came back, despite all of their success, seemed to be based in Quebec, where they're from, and nothing of real significance outside. That everybody in Sochi thought, oh, these people are going to be rich. They're going to be flown coast to coast by Procter and Gamble, and given lavished with all of these deals, and that didn't turn out to be the case. So somebody reached out to me and saying, you should take a look in the modern pentathlon. And I did, and I went and I met with the treasurer, Remo, who showed me their books. And Pentathlon Canada, which is a national sports organization, which sends athletes to the Olympics and to the Pan American Games, is basically on the brink of insolvency. That, by the end of this year, this national sports organization in Canada could have as little as $10,000 left in the bank. That they had, I think, revenue last year of $55,000, and that included a $500 private donation from somebody. And they had to spend $87,000 to get coaches and equipment and sending athletes different places. So they have no money. And then you take it down to the athlete level, and only one modern pentathlete is carded, and that means that they're funded by Sport Canada on an individual level up to about $18,000 for the training. Only one of them gets that. So you have one, and I focused on Donna Vikalis, who's a PhD student at the University of Toronto, and she estimated that it costs her between $40,000 and $60,000. $60,000 being if she wanted to hit every training camp and every competition that she could dream of. and she only gets $4,000 in funding, and that's from Quest for Gold, which is a Government of Ontario program. So that means that as a PhD student, as a university student, she has to somehow find a way to raise, a minimum of $35,000 every year just to compete. So that, every time an Olympic or Pan American Games comes around, she then competes under the Maple Leaf, even though the Maple Leaf doesn't really fund her that much. And what it really raised, and it seems strange when you think about, Vancouver and own the podium and, Canada finding this competitive edge that, Canada isn't comfortable being fourth anymore, that Canada wants to win is, the cost of that is Canada will support winners, but how do you become a winner if you don't have the funding to begin with? And is that sort of the Olympic ideal? Do you want to fund medals, or is the goal to fund athletes? Do you just want to fund where you're going to win, or do you want to fund a broader base so that, somebody likened it to the debate around liberal arts education. Do you want to fund everybody in computer science at the expense of, not letting anybody go and study the classics or, English or literature or anything like that? And that's sort of the debate that I think, Canada has moved beyond, and that the people who say that we should fund a broader base are very much in the minority at this point. But it is interesting just to sort of go back and see, what do you want to fund as a society?
Sean, one last quick question. On a personal level, are you looking forward to the Pan Ams next summer?
I'm torn. I'm a taxpayer in the city of Toronto, and I also have a car, so I'm very curious to see how this all shakes down for me personally, driving. I mean, it's kind of a mess. But in terms of somebody who, knock on wood, is going to be fortunate enough to cover it and talk to these athletes, and Olympic and amateur athletes are just amazing. Like, they really are. Generally speaking, they're just tremendous. That there is no pot of gold at the end for this. They're doing this because they want to represent their country. That they really enjoy what they're doing, the competition, and they have great stories. And the sports are fun to watch. It's very high level, and you don't get an opportunity to do that in this region. So, as a spectator, yes, I'm looking forward to it. As somebody who has to occasionally drive from, say, East York down to Ricoh Coliseum, no, I'm not looking forward to that.
Sean Fitz-Gerald, the National Post. We'll link your stuff out there. It's well worth the read. Good stuff, Sean. Keep up the work, and maybe we'll touch base down the line.
Absolutely. Happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Sean. And hopefully they don't turn that Velodrome into a biodome.
If your phone, like mine, sucks and it's constantly being filled up by all of these podcasts, all of these archived podcasts of the Five Rings and Two Solitudes, there is a solution. Stitcher Radio, everyone. Download the app. It is the greatest app that has ever been produced for the iPhone and for the Android. Download it now. You won't fill your phone up with more Five Rings and Two Solitudes podcasts because it'll all be there on demand for you to play anywhere you want on Stitcher Radio.
And welcome back. Thanks again to Sean for joining us. Look, I think that Sean's a fair guy when it comes to these games. He's not dismissive of them like some people are in the Toronto media, but he's also not completely ignoring some of the aspects and the issues that people have concerns with, particularly the local issues, which you don't think about them so much. You hear about them, but you don't think about them until they're affecting you. I don't know how I will feel trying to get around the city next summer during those games if I'm frustrated by the traffic, by the TTC, by the whatever. But to me, it's a small price to pay for the infrastructure improvements. But I appreciate that not everyone's the same thing, Kevin.
Oh, for sure. But what I do like on Sean's point of view too is he explains why he has those reservations, the reason why, the local reasons why, the outside the fan perspective why he's excited too. He seems very pragmatic when he looks at the result and where those games are, and seems like more people in Toronto should see it that way.
Yeah, I go back and forth on whether Toronto's too cool for school on this, or whether there actually is going to be a groundswell of interest when the games happen. I think that it depends on the television coverage and how in your face it is. If Canadians start winning gold medals early on in these games, they could get momentum. I don't necessarily dismiss the possibility of particularly swimming and track having big crowds out, and even some of the smaller stuff as well. I think that when push comes to shove, that people will appreciate it for what it is, and a lot of the naysayers that are, not necessarily fans of amateur sport in the first place will just shut up for the 2 weeks and then they'll be over. What I don't think it's going to do is have some great lasting memory other than the legacy issues of talking about the usage. I don't think people are going to be like talking about this in 10 years as the great summer of 2015 when the Pan Ams were in Toronto, but I think it could be a fun 2 weeks.
Yeah, for sure. You won't get the sporting moment example like Nadia Comaneci getting a perfect note like in Montreal or Usain Bolt breaking the world record. You won't get those magical moments that the Olympics do have. So I agree with you with that. There's not going to be that one memorable instant or souvenir that people will get from that tournament competition. But at the end of the day, if it goes out without a hitch, at least what you remember is not going to be the nightmare of the traffic or the nightmare of the public transport.
Yeah, the one caveat I'll give you to that if a story does emerge, I think it'll be a team sports story. And we're going way back before your time with the reference I'm about to make now, Kevin. It's almost before my time, too. The Olympiad in Edmonton in '82, I want to say, when the Canadian basketball team beat the U.S. And I appreciate I'm going way outside, way down into the rabbit hole here to make this reference. But I do, as a very small child, remember people very excited that the Canadian basketball team had beat the U.S. basketball team at the university games and in Edmonton in '82, and that was kind of the story that emerged and became a selling point and something that Basketball Canada used for a lot of years as a great memory to focus on. So that is possible. I think the team sports always do have the potential to galvanize a fan group, a nation more than the individual sports, and I suspect that will be, if there is a moment, will be where it comes from.
Absolutely, and hopefully it'll be a nice summer in Toronto. I still have a plan to make it up there for a couple of games, a couple of competition, and it should be fun.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward greatly. The tickets are weird. I'm hopeful that there will be rush tickets. I suspect that there will be, and that's how they'll sell them out. I find that the prices, although they are affordable to buy one or two, but to not buy 30, right? So that's kind of my gig on that. I can't afford, based on what the prices are right now, to go out to 60 events. But if rush tickets are available at a greatly reduced price, I suspect that I will make a concerted effort to get out at least every other day to something. And I kind of want to just do things that I've never seen before. That's kind of how I want to approach them personally.
Usually those type of events and competition, they always have a box office, a ticket office, the day of or the prior day in downtown core. So I wouldn't be surprised if in downtown Toronto there is last minute box office to try to sell tickets a little cheaper, but trying to fill those venues. It happened in Montreal for all those big festivals. It happens in Toronto for the same thing. And usually it happens for those big events as well. It was same thing in Rio. They had a booth to sell tickets for games that were not sold out, and it really helped the fans of soccer in Rio to be able to catch some games for the World Cup last summer. So I expect there's going to be a ticket office in Toronto similar to that.
Fair enough, and we'll continue to cover this as it gets closer, and the Women's World Cup will have more coverage on here as well, but not today. But we are going to talk about another women's team sport right now, and that's hockey, ice hockey. The World Championships just came and went, and you may be forgiven if you didn't notice that, because I cannot remember, Kevin, a Women's World Championship where there was less less hype, less press on it than this past one. Can you?
No, I can't. I learned about its existence probably the day before, and usually it's something that we cover, we follow. This year seems like it was falling between two chairs because it's in Sweden or Finland. I think it's Sweden, don't know, Duane. Because because it's in Europe, because it's time difference is really weird. The games are in the morning, and people are not used to watching women's hockey in the morning. It's not like the juniors tournament in the Christmas time. There's not that habit now, and for some reason, the press, because of both you and Toronto, the Toronto Maple Leafs are so bad that that's all I'm talking about here. The Habs are good and the Impact. So everybody's talking about those point of view, and it seems like the news of the Women's World Championship that Canada finished second, the United States won, well, it got pushed to very bottom of the sports news.
Yeah, look, there's a little fatigue outside of the Olympics. I mean, the Olympics, the five rings are always going to have something special about them that's going to get people to pay attention and get excited about. But the World Championships, when it comes to women's hockey, is really suffering from the same thing, and we've talked about this multiple times on this show before, the lack of depth in the field, the fact that there really is only two teams that can realistically compete for a gold medal. This isn't even like the ball is round kind of thing, or the puck is slides or whatever. I don't know what the hockey equatable of that, the ball is round is, but it's not even that.
Puck is rubber?
Yeah, there's no chance. I'll say this outright. This is not a case of on any given day that a team could rise up and beat a team. It's happened, I think, once or twice all time that a team has beaten a team not Canada or the United States has beaten them. You know what I'm saying? Like that, Finland beat the U.S. once, Sweden beat the U.S. once. That's all that's ever happened in all time. It's not a case of this is even being possible. So it's not really a competition anymore when that's the case, right?
So the chance that a team beats both U.S. and Canada in the same tournament to win that World Championship, well, like you said, it's almost non-existent.
Yeah, I'd go so far. It is impossible.
It is non-existent, yeah.
It's sometimes if I were to go out and play a tennis game against Milos Raonic, I could not beat him ever, right?
Yeah, you could probably say the same thing for Genie Bouchard.
Yeah, I could play him 1 million times and never win. Maybe never win more than 2 points against him. If he missed, like double faulted a couple times or something, I might get a point.
Maybe never hit a serve.
Like, it's just physically impossible. And I would argue that in women's hockey right now, it is physically impossible for these teams, even the best of those teams, your Switzerlands, your Finlands, your Swedens, to ever really compete on any realistic level to win a gold medal. And that's a problem, and a problem that needs to be addressed. And I don't know what the easy answer is, Kevin.
We've been trying to find that answer for like more than a year now, and we don't know. Like we were talking off here, I think like United States and Canada are getting better every year. I don't know if it's because of the NWSL or NWHL, or maybe the new partnership that some teams do have with some professional men's team, like the Montreal Stars have a partnership with the Canadiens Montreal right now to help with infrastructures and places to practice for the women's team and all that. So it's not going to get better. It's actually going to get worse. I believe the Canadian and United States American team will get better. So I don't know what the solution is. I have no idea.
To me, well, I have an idea that I have been a proponent of for a while, and I'll share it here now. I think I've shared it before on this show, but I'll reshare it now. I think that Canada and the United States, their senior teams should drop out of the World Championship level. I think that instead they should send either a U20 team or a U19 team to that competition, to the World Championships. I think they still might win. But I do think that it would be more of a chance that they might be upset, that there'd be more competition. It would be better for the Canadian and American teams too, because they'd be pushed. In exchange for pulling out of the World Championships, Canada and the U.S. would play every year a 4 out of 7 match series that would rotate between big rinks in Canada and the United States. It would generate all sorts of attention. It would be intense. It would be, a series in the playoff mode that we're all used to in North America. The revenue generated from the ticket sales from that would then, in my mind, go to help seed programs in other countries to help them bridge that gap. And it may seem counterintuitive from a sporting perspective to help these other countries, but I do legitimately think that if Canada and the United States do not close this gap sooner rather than later, at least somewhat, that they really are in danger of losing their Olympic status, because they can't. It's a match competition. So that is always has been my plan, is pull it out, play 4 to 7, get it nationally televised. TSN doesn't have hockey in the playoffs anymore, so TSN's a ripe candidate to show it. Play the games in big rinks that could sell tickets. Canadians will go. I went to see a Canada-US game. It was a wonderful spectacle to watch. It's intense. The rivalry is amazing. It brings out all the good things about women's sport. So play it up and let your kids play in the World Championship to give the rest of the world a chance to compete in that until such a time comes when you can maybe eventually close this gap and get back to putting your full senior team in there. The Olympics stay the same. Obviously the Olympics, you're going to send your full team, but that's another story altogether.
No, exactly. And if you believe that we're dreaming that the fact that women's hockey might lose its place, well, just look at baseball at the Olympics. Same type of problem. A couple countries were dominating the rest of the world. Well, look what happened. Baseball's not in the Olympic for now.
Softball is on the women's side is in more equatable, even more so. Let's move on from that. We did actually try and book a women's hockey guest this week, and unfortunately, in a what I think is a telling way, they weren't really that cooperative in getting back to us. So, women's hockey, women's sport sometimes has to help itself out a little bit too, and I'll leave it at that. I don't want to name names or shame anyone, but alas. Kevin, the Masters start today.
It does. Well, actually, it started yesterday with the Par 3 tournament with Jack Nicklaus Jack Nicklaus, the Golden Bear, actually did a hole-in-one at 75 years old. I thought it was worth mentioning.
Speaking of, if I ever hit a hole in one in my golf career, I use the term career very, very loosely. I've long decided this, that I will literally walk off the course and never touch a golf ball again. It will be the last swing that I ever do.
Dropping the mic.
I think everyone should, really. Anyway, I don't have the temperament for golf.
I can tell.
Yeah, I get a little frustrated sometimes.
After 2 holes, where's your clubs? They're all in the lake.
I'm better, but when I was a kid, yeah. Anyway, we're getting off topic because it's kind of an awkward topic I want to talk about. The Masters have a bad history of sort of Augusta National, of having sort of, let's just put to find a point on it, racist and sexist policies. This has long made me very resistant to watching the Masters, and I am aware that I'm a pebble in the ocean when it comes to affecting anything. But I do have a wonder sometimes, Kevin, whether that's something that we should be doing, whether sports fans should just worry about sports and not worry about anything beyond it, because it's somewhat pointless and maybe we're missing the point. Kevin, do you have any sport, any activity, event that you don't watch because of philosophical differences?
Yeah, I don't want people to think that I take defense of feminism or sexism. No, but I don't know if it's because I'm getting older or wiser, but I don't know. But everything surrounded some women's sport that are focusing, or not even sport, I wouldn't call them sport, but I'm a big combat sports fan, and I'm starting to have problems with the fact that they use ring-on girls. That type of atmosphere, that macho-ness, that too much testosterone in certain sport, it's starting to get to me. The fact that some women athletes, are not used for their abilities, but for their look, for promotion, those type of things are starting to annoy me a little bit, yes.
Fair enough, and that's certainly something that MMA is a sport that it has a macho undercurrent to it, we'll say, but for sure.
Even all those action sports and all those sports where I don't think they glorify women. Because I'm not here I'm not better than anybody else here. But I think there's, if you want the people to take it seriously, to go back to the women's hockey point earlier, well, you should treat athletes like as an athlete. Doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman. Anyways.
Fair enough. Yeah. Look, with me, with the Masters, it comes back that they've just crossed too many lines too often for me to be able to effectively watch it. I wasn't a big fan anyway, though, so that makes it easier. You look at another event, the Boycott Indiana stuff, which those that don't know was a social media movement to boycott products and events in Indiana because of the anti-gay laws that were signed into law there. They've since been repelled a little bit, so they backed off of this. But there was an interesting article on BuzzFeed, of all places, about how Boycott Indiana was actually hurting Indiana and hurting Indianapolis and hurting the pro people that were trying to fight for equality when it came to gay rights. So sometimes I think that we get caught up in our own sort of self-righteousness and don't necessarily look at the big picture. And also, look, the more the point I'm making with that is I watched Wisconsin play Duke the other night. I watched a lot of the NCAA, even though I have huge problems with it. So, it's one thing for me to say I'm not going to watch the Masters because I have philosophical differences with what I view as sexist and racist sort of decisions that have been made by the people that are running that over the years. But I don't really watch a lot of golf anyway, and it's quite another for me to give up a sport that I do like. But the one area where I do draw the line, absolutely, and this is a less controversial area for those people that think feminism is controversy, but we'll leave that aside for a second. I won't watch very much Serie A anymore. And the reason I don't watch a lot of Serie A is because of the match-fixing allegations that have been chronic in that country for years, and I don't see them doing enough to fix it and address it. And when I've had arguments with Serie A fans over the seriousness of match fixing in the past that just illustrate how little they give it any regard. And to me, that is the line in the sand that I will not cross. If you are giving me sort of an indication that you're not in the up and up, that you're fixing matches, then I can't watch you, even if I do enjoy you. And I do enjoy watching Serie A. I did for years, but if I've watched more than 10 minutes of it this year, I'd be surprised. It's where I take the break on my soccer watching.
Here's a question for you, Duane. Do you think the fans or the supporters of sports, the listener of sport, the person who's going to buy a ticket to attend an event, Do you think they have a say, and do you think their power that they do have to buy that ticket is enough to change things in those sports or those events?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that in theory, on a theoretical level, they do. If there's enough groundswell of support behind something, then something can change. I think that we've seen. Let's look at the Washington NFL football team's name.
Yeah.
That there is such a huge following of that team that the people that are opposed to the name can't make enough inroads to change. But that doesn't mean similar names haven't changed in lesser sports. Like the University of North Dakota doesn't have a nickname anymore. They were the Fighting Sioux for a long time. And that's a less offensive name than what the Washington NFL team is, right?
Yeah, it's not a derogatory name like the football team is.
Yeah, exactly. Now that's a educational institution that decided that it needed to show an example there, and it caused controversy when they did that too. But the point is that pressure can work in certain cases, and I do think the pressure will eventually work with the Redskins. I think that will be something that gets changed eventually, although it's going to be kicking and screaming all the way. I mean, effectively, if you have to hit the wallet, is what it comes down to, is what I'm saying. And what's the reason that Washington's NFL team is probably going to change is because it's not copyrighted anymore. That you can sell knockoff jerseys now. They have no rights over that image because it was deemed the case that they should revoke their copyright license, and that's ultimately what will change that. So it comes down to pocketbooks. It comes down to whether you think that fans have enough ability or wherewithal to stay away from events that they love in big enough numbers to force a change. Do they? I don't know. History doesn't really bode well very often, does it?
No, and we have to realize too, should we really focus on those issues in sport, or should we take those issues and bring in a broader spectrum and in society in general too? Because a lot of times what happens in sport is a correlation of what happens in actual society. Because sports as a whole are a microcosm of what our societies are. And usually the problems that we have in sports like this they're coming from a bigger problem that stems from the society itself.
Yeah, ultimately, no one cares whether I watch the Masters or not, right?
That's true.
But to take this onto a bigger and more important topic, you get into the subject of boycotts, of sports boycotts, nations boycotting events. We haven't seen a lot of that lately, but there has been some talk recently it's mostly noise, I think, but about boycotting the Russian World Cup. There's U.S. senators made a call for it the other day. There was the talk about pulling out of FIFA because of philosophical issues there. It's such a difficult question for me, the nation of boycotts, because, look, people can do really nasty things and you don't want to support them, but is it really fair to the athlete who's just a pawn to pull out? Was it fair for the athletes in 1980 to lose in Olympics? Was it fair for the athletes in the Soviet bloc to lose their 84 Olympics? For really just retaliation? I don't think so. But then again, was it fair for the world to deny South Africa the opportunity to be a world player for years? And did that boycott play a role in the end of apartheid? I don't know. It's a difficult question.
Yeah, those are always difficult questions, and nobody really has the right answer anyways.
Yeah. It's funny, I don't think there's enough wherewithal or enough general consensus support to have a widespread boycott of an Olympics or a World Cup anymore. I truly don't. But what could happen, and I don't think it's likely, but the more likely thing that might happen with FIFA is the creation of something parallel. I find that dangerous because I think it would be ultimately an exclusionary organization that would basically deny the World Cup, deny Costa Rica's in the future from rising up and being players at the World Cup, and I think that'd be a real shame. But just maybe even the pressure of the thought of that might be enough to create change. And look, sports matter on that level. There's so much money and they have so much cultural and social influence that it does matter how they're operated and how they're run and what kind of messages they're sending. So it's important to find ways to combat these issues that are concerning when they're out there. I just don't know what the answers are, and I didn't intend to come up with an answer in this segment. I just thought that the Masters reminded me of of this subject, and thought that it would be interesting to have a little conversation about it.
Absolute, but you know what? Their grass is still beautiful. No, I'm just kidding. I was gonna say, with all of that, they can put on a great show. Should that be the be all and all? And obviously, I'm sarcastic, but yeah, you get my point.
Well, the extension to that argument is, maybe we should just let sprinters juice up and be, Ben Johnson 1988 Olympic 100-meter final again too, right? Maybe we should let Lance Armstrong get back on the bike and do whatever he wants. So we've created limits. So I don't know. It's a complicated issue, Kevin.
It is. You're absolutely right.
All right, let's take a quick break and get on something less complicated.
Well, we do talk about Concacaf.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Concacaf. It's more like chaotic than complicated, though.
Thanks for listening to the Five Rings Olympic and Amateur Sports Podcast with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramie. If you like this show, you'd like to support it? Well, patreon.com/Two Solitudes 5 Ring. Become a patron of the show and help support the coverage of Olympic and amateur sport around the world.
And welcome back. Before we get into Kevin's little joy party here, we're going to talk a bit about the Paris Olympic bid. There is a vote taking place at Paris City Council on Monday, I believe, where they're going to basically endorse or deny the bid. The mayor of Paris has wavered a little bit, but he seems to be on board with the Olympic train now again. So I don't know Paris municipal politics, but if the mayor's on board, then you think that probably this probably will go through. Is that, I don't know, Kevin? Maybe I'm assuming because you're from Quebec that you know Paris politics more than I do. But
the only thing I know is it's not that easy. It's complicated. It's about 13 different boroughs with all their own small legislative system. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all unfolds Monday. But the mayor, Jean-François Martins, is optimism. He has a lot optimist. He's optimistic. He has a lot of optimism. That's how you say it. So exactly. So he's looking forward to the vote, and hopefully he wants that bid. That's what it looks like.
Yeah, I think that I kind of want Paris to bid. I don't want to spend their money for them, but I think that having watched the 22 bid with only 2, and right now only 3 cities in the bid for 24 with Boston. I'm not sure what's going to happen with Boston. I think that the noise against is going to be loud enough that that they're going to win the day, I think, is what's going to happen there. But I think that you need some competition in there. Paris, do you think that Paris would be the favorite if they get into this, Kevin?
They kind of have to be, having tried for 2012, for many different Olympics in the last 20 years. It seems like the way they're working, it's about their turn, right? Because you always need 2-3 bids before you actually get the game, and it seems like Paris are at that point.
Yeah, they were the favorite for when the London got them, and that sort of surprised a lot of people. And if you look at sort of the history of the Beijing, for instance, with Sydney getting the bid above them, surprisingly, then Beijing got the next bid, which was absolutely idiotic. The Toronto bid against them because everyone on Earth knew that Beijing was getting the bids. I digress. So I wonder that, though, but I never get a great feeling that there's a lot of joy or inspiration around the Paris bid, because I'm never sure whether Paris is necessarily fully 100% behind it themselves. You know what I mean?
I think it goes back to the cities being too big when we talked about with Sean Fitz-Gerald earlier on the show. I think cities like Toronto or Paris or New York are almost too big for those Olympic Games. There's so many things going on that the Olympic Games people are not going to stop their daily lives for them. So, yeah, I believe those cities might be a little too big for those type of events now.
And this is going to sound a little weird when I'm talking about Paris, but it's almost not exotic enough.
True.
Like it's the Olympic movement has tried to go into different places, just like the World Cup has, and Paris is it's Paris.
It'll be like urban area that look like any other urban area, except for the Eiffel Tower and those monuments and sites that you'll be able to differentiate on your TV. The events are going to look like any other city because it's you're right. There's no like mountain backdrop or the Yangtze River that you can. Yes, there's the sign, but it's not the same. You're right.
Well, and Paris is just Paris is always there. It's always going to be a city. It's always going to be an option, I think, for the Olympic movement. I don't know whether the impetus there is to get it in, but alas, we'll find out and follow this more. I still really like the idea of Rome if they can get it together or organize it there, which is never a sure thing with the Italians, to be honest with you, and their politics. But
as long as Berlusconi is not behind the games, it might happen.
Well, you never know. I kind of like that idea. Although I wouldn't be shocked if Hamburg comes out in the end, because those Germans, they know how to run things.
Yep.
As long as we're getting into stereotypes here, Kevin. So your Impact. Tell me about that.
The Impact they booked their ticket to Mexico for April 22nd, the first leg of the Concacaf Champions League Final, becoming the first ever Canadian professional team to make their way to the final of this region's tournament, Champions League of this region, and the second team from Major League Soccer in history to make it there after RSL a couple of years ago.
Under the current
Yes.
the current format, yeah. The CCL, for those that don't know, for
started
international,
in 2008-2009, by the way, the first season.
It's a bizarre little tournament that has teams like that you've never heard of. Joe Public is everyone's favorite.
Arabe Unido.
Yeah, Arab United. Look, CONCACAF is a weird nation, a weird confederation that isn't the most skilled, but is often the most entertaining. There is all sorts of shenanigans that happen all over. The refereeing is terrible at times.
The conditions are horrible.
You get in a really interesting dynamic between the Mexican teams and the rest of the region too. The Mexican teams are, I think, by and large, much more skilled than every other league, including MLS. Is that a fair assessment, Kevin?
Very fair assessment. Just ask Reggiano last night. Yes, very fair assessment.
Yeah, and for the record, they were down. Club America is the team that the Impact are playing in the final. They were down 3-0 going after the first leg at home, which they kind of mailed it in, because the Mexican teams sometimes just forget to play and get upset on the road and then just turn it on and do crazy things. Anyway, they scored 4 goals in 27 minutes.
My Twitter was blowing up. I just finished starting playing tennis. Like, okay, I'll check the score. Holy cow! 20 people mentioned me. I was like, okay. They're like, yeah, I think you go be down to Mexico. Forget about Costa Rica for now.
Yeah. Anyway, so the other thing about the CCL too is that the Canadian factor, and it has kind of been an interesting phenomenon in the last few years. That Major League Soccer has a weird history with international competition because of the way MLS is formatted. For those that don't know, it doesn't really produce elite teams. It produces a nice level of overall talent when you look at the overall league's talent. If you were to make an all-star team out of MLS, it would probably be very competitive if you made it a club team and had it train as such. But any given team is going to struggle because of the way the roster restrictions are. That they can't have an elite team. The league is set up to promote parity, not elite teams like most leagues in the world, which in a Champions League format makes it very difficult to compete. However, the Canadian teams, for some reason, have, even though they've been terrible in MLS, and like terrible in MLS.
Like Toronto in 2011 and Montreal this year.
Yeah, we're talking about 2 teams that finished last place overall in their league. Toronto FC, when they made the semifinal of this competition, was that 3 years ago now? 4 years ago now?
3 years.
Danny Kouvermans, their DP striker, called them the worst football club in the world, unironically, during this run, and they were in the semifinals of a Champions League. The Impact were horrific last year. No offense, Kevin, but they really weren't very good last year.
None taken.
And yet, because of the way that they can qualify in, which is just by beating the other bad Canadian teams, they get a chance in there, and I think that they take it more seriously. And it's a funny little event because the teams that take it seriously can go deep. But anyway, we thought we'd have a little talk about this.
And it's funny too how Canada has taken over that competition. When you look at the sponsors, the biggest crowd, they're all from Canada. You go down to Costa Rica, and what you see is Scotiabank everywhere, boarded everywhere. It's branded as Scotiabank tournament. It's Canadian sponsors everywhere. It really became almost a Canadian regional tournament.
Yeah, well, the Canadian banks are big in the Caribbean and Central America too. But it was funny to see a game in Costa Rica with Scotiabank ads beside the nets and BMO on the on the shirts for the Impact, and it was some of the biggest crowds have been in Canada too. I think that Club America's at Azteca is going to break the all-time record in the first leg. And
last night there was 95,000 people at the Azteca for a game. Second leg, and I expect more than 100,000 for the Impact game on the 22nd.
Yeah, it's the Club America. For those that don't know, is I think that they are maybe the best, most successful historic North American team.
Yeah.
Chivas Guadalajara is up there as well, but they've fallen on hard times. Club America had actually struggled a little bit in recent years. The Mexican League is a funny league in that it has a lot of natural parity. So some of these lesser provincial teams had risen up in recent years, but Club America has really put a lot of priority in closing the gap and getting back on top, and they prioritized winning both the league and the CCL this year. So here they are, and I wanted to have a conversation with Kevin about this because even though it's a soccer conversation, it's a little localized. I think that it is of interest to talk about what the reaction in Montreal is going to be to this game right now. Just tell me what the reaction in Montreal has been in the last couple days since the Impact managed to defy all odds and make the final of the CCL.
20,000 tickets were sold in one day yesterday, Duane. After 1 hour of the ticket office being open yesterday, 10,000 were sold. There is a definite buzz, an excitement, a feeling of pride towards that team that not even 6 months ago were dead last in their own league. And now on the continent level, they achieved something that nobody would thought of. And what surprised me is not just the buzz in Montreal and the amount of tickets that got sold yesterday, but the coverage of it across North America, the support for Montreal, that hashtag MLS for Montreal, everybody from every city in Major League Soccer, journalists, media, players, and supporters of all MLS team. I say all, but almost all. I doubt there's a couple of Torontonians out there that supported some Costa Rican team, but a lot of people supported Montreal, and really surprised me that the whole freaking North America except Mexico was behind the Impact.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. Do you think that the MLS American fans or American teams that ignore the Canadian teams deserve to be associated with the Impact's run?
Sure, why not? Hey, if the first ever team that wins from MLS actually is not even from MLS, but from the Canadian Soccer Association path to Concacaf, I would thought it would be ironic. It would be beautiful.
Yeah. I digress a little bit. That's more of an inside joke for our other show. But let's talk a bit about, again, the reaction. You mentioned the fans' reaction, 20,000 tickets at the Big O. I assumed. I was wondering whether they might try and play at Saputo, but I guess that they just want to fill the big bowl up. What's the media reaction been in Montreal, the local media reaction?
Surprised. They're almost shocked. They didn't think the Impact would pull it off, and now they're late to the party. It took a little while for them to hype the game, but everybody is behind it now. Journalists that don't usually write about the Impact are writing about the Impact, and some pages and spots that are usually reserved for hockey talk, have been used for soccer talk in the last couple of days, so I have to be happy about that.
Now, the one worry that we all have is the Stanley Cup playoff schedule when it comes out. Do you think that if there was a Habs game on the 26th, whether that would hurt attendance?
On the 29th, probably, yes. But, hey, the Impact chose their date first. Who knows if MLS and NHL are going to talk to each other for scheduling? I really doubt it because it's CONCACAF too. So, but it shouldn't have any. I think it's two different sports. It's different enough to gather two different crowds, and the Impact will get their 50,000, and the Habs will find 20,000 freaks to go, anyways.
I guess that the other question is look, I hate has the sport arrived questions because I think the sport clearly is what it is. It's not going anywhere in this country. But have the Impact gained fans from this? Has it gained a greater foothold in the market, or is this a sort of 1 month party?
No, I think it did. I think in 2009 it did really create a certain buzz and brought a lot of new fans to the product that stayed over the years. And I think this longer stint in the knockout stage of the Concacaf Champions League did generate a lot of new fans, especially young players, young kids that are starting to watch football. They play football, but they're starting to watch soccer more, and they're getting more interested. And those type of runs, the tournament run, there's almost certain magic to it. It's become magical because there's like 4 or 5 moments in the entire run where one different play here would have eliminated the Impact. One thing different here would have changed everything. So there's a certain magical to the way the Impact's run is. So yeah, it did create some new fans, especially kids too, like a 4 or 5-year-old that's seeing this team pull off the great miracles and last-second goals to win a game in a series. That's what it does, and hopefully they stay in the long run.
Yeah, the other last question on that sort of vein I have is this: is the market sophisticated enough to realize how big the challenge is and still react positively with a noble loss?
I think it's our job from now on to explain who Club America is and what type of level they used to play, and to give a certain cautious, people needs to be to realize what's going to be for the impact of the Estadio Azteca. It's going to be, you thought that Estadio Alejandro Morera Soto was a hostile environment. You haven't seen nothing yet.
Yeah, well, they hung 6 goals up, and that alone should tell people what they need to know about this team. The key to the tie, to me, look, I'm not being a troll or being mean-spirited when I say that it's very unlikely to me that Montreal could overcome this. However, I think that I don't think that's a problem. I think that it is a noble loss to get this far, and the Montreal fans should just enjoy the ride for what it is. However, if Montreal were to be competitive, what Montreal should really hope for is that they go back maybe down 2 goals. If you go down 2 goals back in Montreal, then at least there's some hope there if you get a goal at home or something, right? Is that a fair assessment?
Or a goal on the road. Who knows? If you lose 4-1 at the Azteca, come back home, who knows what's going to happen? Mexican team has been known not to travel well outside of their country, so who knows what's going to happen. But like you say, I will enjoy the game for what it is, and I am realistic of what the outcome and the look of that game could be.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I maintain that the international competition games that have happened that I've been privileged enough to see here in Toronto are some of the best that I've ever seen at BMO Field. MLS, the grind, the league is important, and it's certainly the CCL is not more important than MLS. A lot of people sometimes try and point to that. It's not the UEFA Champions League. In fact, the UEFA Champions League isn't more important than the domestic leagues either. That's another topic altogether. But it is something special, and does create a different kind of vibe. And look, I'm still contemplating coming up for it. There's a Toronto game in Montreal a week later, so I may save my pennies up to do that. But not very often is a championship in the world of football declared or going to be decided in Canada, and this is one. I can't, there'll be the Women's World Cup as well this summer, so it's kind of a special time for Canadian
Is it the first time since '84 that a trophy of that size will be awarded in Canada?
Yeah, maybe. Well, you've got the 2007 FIFA Under-20 World Cup, which I was privileged to be at the final of. Sergio Aguero won it for Argentina. Anyway, no, it's special. I think that non-impact fans, and I'm speaking to people that are in Toronto or Ottawa or wherever, that can get up, should go up, because it's when are you going to get a chance to see this? Look, the Impact's run has been peppered with fortune. And I don't mean to be disrespectful when I say that. There's a lot of things that had to go right that did go right, and that's part of the magic of sport, right?
Yep.
But the idea that this is going to happen year after year after year is far-fetched. It takes a lot of luck and a lot of the good draw that they got. They had to have New York decide to crap the bed. They had to have Drew Fisher blow a call in the Canadian Championship. So much had to happen to get there. And I just hope that people in Montreal and people that are close to Montreal and can get down for the game do and just enjoy it and suck it in. The old adage here in Canada, and we're getting a little off the topic of two rings.
Sure, 2 rings.
We'll call it 2 rings. This is a 2-ring segment. Should you be obligated as a Canadian football supporter, soccer supporter to cheer for the Impact? The answer to that is no. You should never be obligated to cheer for anyone. There are Canadians on the team. Patrice Bernier is a wonderful, classy individual that has represented this country many times, that has played a role in these series. Tissot is a great up-and-coming kid that's around there. But it's Canadians are enjoying this, and it's still kind of funny, and it would be really spectacular from an MLS Canadian perspective to force them to notice this up here and be the first team to win it would be kind of funny.
And to eliminate 2 Mexican team and a Costa Rican team in a knockout? Like, no way. If that happens, MLS will never forgive itself for Montreal, of all places, to be able to the first one to win that trophy.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Are you glad it was Club America?
For some reason, I am happier that it's Club America because if it would have been Herediano, an example, Montreal beats Herediano, people will be like, yeah, of course, but you didn't beat Club America, which was the best team. It's not as important. If Montreal beats America, no excuses. Montreal would have been the best team in that tournament and come out on top. So for that reason alone, and for the fact that I might have to go to Estadio Azteca for the first time in my life, yeah, I was happy about it.
Yeah, that's like I'm coming from a more of a neutral perspective. I was sort of enjoying the spectacle when Cameron Porter scored the goal at the dying seconds to win the quarterfinal tie. I just started laughing because it's just something that you just had to appreciate on some level, even if the Impact are technically TFC's rivalry. Which anyway, but that said, I thought that for it to have meaning, the Impact would need to beat Club America or even a noble loss, like I said. To go down and if you got the lucky draw all the way through and got the other Costa Rican team in there, yeah, you might win and you might get to go to the Club World Cup. I don't think the Club World Cup is necessarily all that it's chalked up to be. You could get down there and lose in the quarterfinal stage and never get to play one of the big boys. And then what's the point? You played, a J League team, and is that so that's and by the time it rolls around, and realistically, the other thing about the Club World Cup is that you're not going to beat Barcelona, folks. It won't be pretty.
No. You thought Club America was good? Wait till you play Barcelona.
No, it's just not reasonable.
Messi with the shot past Evan Bush for the 10th time today.
That said, I'm sure that is a lot of the attention that is getting played in the casual media is that the Impact are 1 or 2 wins away from being able to potentially play.
That's exactly what the talking point is, Duane. That's exactly the narrative the media are going with.
It's 3 wins away, by the way, too, because they have to go through the quarterfinals at the Club World Cup. But, it does have a certain something about it, even though no one pays attention to it when it actually happens.
You're right. Can you remember off the top of your head where the last Club World Cup was?
Monaco, I think.
Fine.
But I'm not normal, though.
Exactly. I was going to say, yeah, we're not good at reference because the year before it was in Japan and before it was in Morocco. We're not normal.
Yeah. No, I final thought. I like the idea of the Club World Cup. I think that it is important for there to be a trophy that the entire world technically can win. And I use the word technically on purpose because that's what, it's realistically, there's been an African team made the final one year, but by and large, it's really just an extension of the European team and the South American team playing the one-off game every year, right? Yeah. So inviting the rest of the world in and giving a chance for everyone to compete for it, I think that is important, and I think that is something that makes this sport special, is that connection and that ability, to dream of your team playing against one of the big boys one day and knocking them down, even though it's never going to happen, but alas.
Absolutely, Duane.
All right. That was our two rings. Our 2 rings
radio segment.
Yeah. All right. We won't normally go into that, but I thought it was worthwhile because I hadn't had a chance to talk to Kevin about the game yet either. All right, Kevin, say goodbye.
All right. So until this weekend, a lot of great the starting of summer season is happening in all Olympic and amateur sports. So take a follow, get used to it, and be ready for the summer for the Pan American game and read Sean Fitz-Gerald on the National Post.